Hi, my name is Philip Kugel. I'm a data analyst at Areli Corp, and I originally fell in love in data when I went to grad school in San Diego. And I realized that data was all around us, and that with data, you can make informed decisions. And with that, you can reach your trajectory better. So I fell in love with data then, and now I've had the chance to work with it with savvy coders. And I'm excited to show you my presentation on the happiness index for the world. Let me share my screen. So what makes citizens of other countries happier than the United States? So there's a certain amount of countries that tend to rank higher than the United States. And we kind of think of happiness as relative. As long as we're doing better than our neighbors, we tend to be happier. So what countries are doing well compared to their neighbors? But it seems almost be a world metric rather than just a regional metric. So let's dive right in. So the World Happiness Index, it's a yearly poll conducted by Gallup for United Nations, and they survey about 1,000 people in each country, and they ask them questions like, how do you feel about corruption in your government? How do you feel about your economic wealth? Do you feel like you're being supported socially? And then at the end, they ask them, how happy would you rank yourself? And the world map that we have here is a heat map of how these countries rank. So it seems like the Americas are generally pretty happy, and Australia is also another happy country. But if you look closely in Western Europe, they tend to be the lightest blue. They tend to be the happiest. The Nordic countries and Netherlands and Switzerland, they tend to do really well in the happiness ranking. So why is that? So just to give this a little bit more detailed layout, this is the ranking of each country over the last 8 years and their average rank, and then their overall rank compared to that average rank. So Denmark, Finland, Iceland, they tend to rate the top three in the last 8 years. And then you have countries in the bottom 10, like Afghanistan, Rwanda, South Sudan, Syria, countries that are at war, they tend to be a lot unhappier. But the United States, it ranks relatively well at 17. So we're not the happiest. We still have a little ways to go, but we still are a relatively happy nation. But what are the attributes of these happier countries? There's some things that they do differently, and we're going to observe just two today. But those two things that we're going to look at is childbirth and work culture. So one of the things in childbirth, when you have a kid, one of the first things they give you in these happier countries is a birth box, which is basically like your first 3 years of stuff they kind of need for clothing to take care of the baby. And the box itself can be turned into a cot so the baby can stay in. And Finland, Denmark, Iceland, a lot of these top countries, even Canada and Australia, have boxes for people when they first give birth. And this is a little more detailed look into the childbirth. So having the cost of a child is a lot cheaper. It tends to be under $300, where in the U.S. it tends to be about $12,000. So it's very expensive in countries that are not in these top 10. And then parental leave, in the U.S. it tends to be measured in weeks. You'll get a couple of weeks off, but in the happier countries, they tend to give months off. Sometimes as much as 6 months that is shared between the parents so they can each spend quality time with the child. So that's something that's very different. Something that's also measurable too is mortality rate. It tends to be under 10, where in the US it tends to be around 18 per 100,000. And so the fact that it's about half is less riskier to have a child in these happier countries, it means it's better for the families to be at. Also, childcare tends to be free or at least below $200 per week, where in the US it's much more than that. It tends to be in the thousands of dollars to have your child at childcare, and they have that box of essentials like I was saying beforehand. So something else is also different in these happier countries is their work culture. In the US, people kind of stay behind their monitors and look busy. But even sometimes when they are busy and working really hard on projects, They're working overtime. They're working 12, 16 hours to get a project done in that amount of time. But what you see in these Nordic countries and like Canada, Australia, is that people are they're focused on doing their job, but once the 8 hours is up, it's done. You know, they want to be as productive as they can be at the time. And this is kind of seen in Sweden, it's called fika, but a lot of other countries have stuff like this as well. Fika is a coffee spelled backwards in Swedish. And they basically have mandatory breaks in the mid morning and afternoon so that there's less accidents and less stress and more ease of working in the place, because it's not as stressed out when they're working there. Rather than just being a place they see as stressful, is a place where they can also relax. And these are protected by law too. It's not just like a break per company. It's like national level that you must have a break at around this time. So that's something that's very different than U.S. work culture. So life outside is also valued more outside of work. You see a lot of people in the U.S. The first thing they ask is kind of like, "What do you do?" And you kind of associate your job with a lot of your identity. But in these Nordic countries, they're more focused on like their hobbies or what they're doing with their families or what activities they're doing socially. It seems to be more the topic of conversation than what do you do. And finally, the management style is a lot flatter. You know, there's not really a boss they have to report to. There's not as many timelines. It just tends to be you manage yourself and you coordinate with other people rather than being more vertical and top down that we see in a lot of corporate America. So these Nordic countries seem to be happier, and we looked at two different reasons. There's kind of a recipe. If you look at a lot of the data in depth, that'd be for a longer presentation. But for this presentation, there's kind of two things that really are a recipe for a good, happy country. One is that there's high quality, non-corrupt, and effective institutions. So what does this mean? So when a citizen views their country, whether it's private institutions or public institutions, as corrupt, they tend to be a lot less happy. So if they're able to do high quality things like provide good public works and able to provide help when they need to, this is something that these happier countries are able to do consistently that countries that are less happy don't really have. You know, people, if you, maybe not a majority of people, but some people, if you ask in the US, do you feel the government is kind of corrupt? They'll kind of go off on their rant and tell you about it. But there's also something that's different too, is that there's these generous cultural norms. You see this in corporations and you see this in nonprofits and you see this in the government as well, that when people, when they face an adversity, rather than going over it alone, they get a lot of help. And through that help, they're able to overcome that adversity, and that makes them much happier. So the US, maybe they can focus on those two things, and maybe we can reach the top 10 happiest countries in the world. Any questions?
Just a comment. That's really telling. You know, other countries on the top 10 there, they really look for you know, value in the individual and helping people out more so than trying to look for ways to extract, you know, the most amount of money from them. That's really, really crazy.
Yeah, thank you, Israel. I appreciate that. It's true because you know, we kind of have this version of like freedom in America where we view you want to be really free. But in the US or in these happier Nordic countries and like Canada, Australia too, it's okay to kind of reach out and get support. It's not kind of shunned by, you're not being free and independent by not reaching out. So it's really encouraged to do that. And with that, people are able to overcome all types of adversities, you know, in their day-to-day life. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and y'all have a good day. Okay, let me just end this recording.